Hello and welcome back to the Drop Step podcast. I'm your host, Jack Quantrill, and today I am joined by someone that I've been following on the online space for a very, very long time. If you are watching on video, you can see who we've got. We've got Mike Shearer, aka Basketball Poetry. Mike, lovely poster up in the background. I need to get some Drop Step merch hung up in the Quantrill household, but it is
That's
very
right.
nice indeed. How are you doing today, man? Thank you so much for coming on.
I'm doing quite well. Thanks for having me. I'm glad we were able to get together after, we've been trying for a couple days now. So I'm glad we're here.
Yeah, the life of amateur podcasting is curtailed by internet issues and time differences alike. But no, Mike, you've been very accommodating. And today, hopefully, it will all be worthwhile because we are essentially doing burning questions for the final part of the regular season. We have two real NBA sickos here on this podcast today, two people who could talk for hours. So I thought, why not get one of the most entertaining writers on in the space and ask Mike what it is that he's going to be looking out for in the next 6 weeks, 8 weeks or so before the end of the season. So Mike, without further ado, what is the thing that is going to be concerning you most with the NBA as we gear up for the playoffs?
I think the thing that I'm most excited to talk about first is how are the Spurs and Pistons going to do in the playoffs? And this is something that maybe has longer term ramifications for the league. And we have some more short term focused things we'll talk about later. But these are two teams that are very successful at a much younger than usual age. And they'll be entering the playoffs as 1 or 2 seeds. The Spurs have a real chance to get to the number 1 seed too. So we'll see if they can play some catch up while the Thunder remain riddled with injuries. But neither has had any recent postseason success. The Spurs haven't even made the play-in. The Pistons lost a very hard-fought and honorable series against the Knicks last season, but they still lost. They're going to be going into the playoffs as pretty heavy favorites in the first round. And I think conventional wisdom is not giving these two teams enough credit, in my opinion. And I think there are reasons on paper you can look at them and be like, hey, they're about to struggle. We know the history of young teams that they always got to have, 1 or 2 knocks to the head before they're able to kind of advance to the conference finals or further. You can look at the 2024 Thunder were the 1 seed before they lost to Luka and the Lob Goblins. We've seen the Cavaliers be dominant teams that fall short in the playoffs recently. The Milwaukee Bucks recently, had several first-round losses before they finally made it to the Eastern Conference Finals. And then later on to the finals and winning the championship. But this is like kind of a truism that the NBA holds as a rule. And I think that if any teams were positioned to kind of break through this barrier of the young team that can't have postseason success, it will be one of these two squads. And I'll pause there.
The stat I heard the other day, I was listening to Chucking Darts. Long time listeners will know that Chucking Darts is a friend of the podcast, another one that you should go and check out. But I think he had, what's his name, Ben Shepherd, not the Indiana Pacer, on to talk about the Spurs and to talk about sort of the top end of the 2026 draft class. And Ben said something along the lines of, no team has gotten out of their conference in the last 30 years without having won a playoff series in the previous 2 seasons. So I think it was the Houston Rockets in either 1994 and 1995. Well, it must have been the first one because they obviously go back to back. They were the last team to go and win their conference, having not won a playoff series. And this applies to both of the teams that we're talking about today. So, Mike, I guess I'll ask, what is it? I've got some ideas of my own. What is it about these two teams that you think positions them above the likes of, say, OKC, the Memphis Grizzlies, and the other teams that you've mentioned in the past, these like young rosters that have had phenomenal regular seasons? I mean, even Houston last year, right, seemed to sort of break into that and had a really competitive first round series. What do you think positions them to be a team to threaten to make the finals this year?
Yeah, let's start with Detroit. I think there's 2 different stories for these 2 different teams. And I think Detroit's in some ways is more interesting because they're the team that has the very clear and obvious flaw that everyone will point to. They can't shoot. Nobody on the team can shoot seemingly except for Duncan Robinson. And, he's about as good as you can ask, but there is so little spacing on this team. And I think everybody is pointing to the fact that, like, hey, in the playoffs, defenses are going to adjust and like the Pistons just aren't going to be able to score. There's not going to be any room for them. I would counter that with 2 things, which is like nobody in the East is really particularly well equipped to score against the Pistons, who have had the best defense in the league since mid-November, I'd say, better than the Thunders in that time frame, which, again, Thunder have been injured and the Pistons have largely been pretty healthy. But I think that, like, there's two sides of the coin. And, like, yeah, sure, like, it'll be hard for the Pistons to score. But, like, they're playing in phone booths already. Like, the NBA is better about regular season adjustments than it used to be. I kind of think there's this, like, theory that, like, hey, it's, you know, over a 7-game series or whatever, like, your game plans get tighter. You can spend more time focusing on these guys. But teams have gotten much better about preparing for the game by game minutia of the regular season, I think, for like the big strokes, things like this. Like, yes, people will play off the Piston shooters because they don't have any. Like, they're going to do that in the regular season too. This isn't going to be some like fine-tuned wrinkle that they're going to unleash in the playoffs that the Pistons have never seen before. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's not like this is the first time we'll see people sagging off into the lane off of Alsar Thompson spaced into the corner. Cade has had to deal with this, not even like just this season, but for the entirety of his career. So he might be someone that's more, I think Thinking Basketball describes them as like inelastic scorers, where the efficiency he puts out on a night-to-night basis is what you are going to get, not like irregardless of matchup, but he might be a little bit more resistant to like some of the true shooting drop-offs that we see from regular season to postseason.
Yeah, and it's like, I think the other way to frame it would be like he has a high floor as a scorer, as an offensive force, right? And we know that the Pistons are a top 10 offense this season. They're better than that when Cade is on the court. And I think, something that people get a little lost in, and then this will come up later in another conversation, I think, is that individual efficiency is extremely important. But the most important thing is how much can your team score when you're on the court? And sometimes your inefficiency does not get in the way of a team being able to put the ball in the basket. And, there's waterfall effects to a player of Cade's talent, being able to pass the way he does, being able to push the ball the way he does, being able to get and establish really strong post position in the paint with his back to the basket and kind of orchestrate the offense from an unusual position for a point guard. So there's trickle down effects to this where I think it'll work out. The other thing with Detroit is like the rest of the East is weak. And I don't mean that skill level wise. I mean physically, in a way that I think the Pistons will just purely be able to dominate. The only team that's like really a high level contender in the East that I think could potentially even come close to matching their level of length and strength is going to be Cleveland. And that still very much remains to be seen. They upgraded, I think, from Garland to Harden with at least a little bit of an eye on what a Cleveland, New York or a Cleveland, Detroit matchup would look like. And hey, we just saw Detroit beat the pants off the Knicks again, missing their two biggest and strongest guys. Like, I just don't think Detroit's worried about New York at all. And you know what? Boston probably would have said the same thing about New York last year. And then New York went and took it to them even before Jayson Tatum got hurt. But I just look at the East and I'm like, nobody here is going to be able to take away Detroit's strengths in a way that they would need to survive a 7-game series. So that's where I'm at with Detroit right now.
It's similar to the Pacers effect over the past couple of seasons where the Pacers physically ran you out the gym. But, it's nice to have a Detroit team back that resembles the bad boy Pistons. And you do see that sort of grind just multiplying on teams as they go through a 7-game series. If we're talking about James Harden versus Detroit, a player who's notoriously brilliant games 1 to 4 in playoff series, and then maybe the stamina drops off a little bit, games 5, 6, and 7, that could be an effect that is amplified. I think what I would be concerned with in terms of like the Detroit experience is, and I'm not typically one to like bring these kinds of things up, they are a team that plays with their hearts on their sleeves, as we saw against Charlotte the other night. Perhaps not like perhaps the issues won't be physical, perhaps they won't be on the court, perhaps they'll be up here a little bit in terms of staying cool and basically Isaiah Stewart not getting another 7-game ban. I love Beef Stew. I'm sure that the Knicks are dreading him being back for a potential matchup if they're already struggling with the Pistons' physicality. But it's like a multifaceted game, right? So there are other things to consider. It should be said, despite that stat, the team hasn't won their conference in 30 years. The Pacers nearly did it 2 seasons ago. We were a couple of injuries away from them really challenging the Celtics prior to actually making the finals the year after. And it does feel like we're right at the start of a far more physical era, and Detroit are very, very ahead of the curve, particularly in comparison to the Eastern Conference, with championing that physicality, championing sort of the turnover game with regards to offensive rebounding and generating steals in the half court. So it will be interesting to look out for. Do you think that there's a potential mental side to the game with Detroit, or are you happy with that group of players and how sort of resilient they can be up here?
I think if you look a lot of the top teams in the NBA, they all have guys you'd be worried about a little bit who can get frustrated in different ways, right? Like I think of somebody like Luka or Jokic, and like when they get frustrated because things aren't going their way, their effort wanes. They get frustrated, they start making worse passes. You can see it in their on-court play. Guys like Detroit or not quite as high caliber, like Phoenix and Dylan Brooks. Like, yeah, you're worried about their guys losing their cool a little bit, but I think once you get to the playoffs, teams are usually able to control themselves, and we've seen high-profile exceptions. Draymond Green is prominent in many of them. Chris Paul is prominent in many of them, right? But I think this is something that, like, this is where Detroit, having had that playoff experience last year, may come in handy, because they did suffer some absolutely brutal defeats in that series against the Knicks, where they're, snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. They had, I think it was game 4, where Tim Hardaway Jr. got fouled when time was running out. They didn't call it, and they were down 1. He should have had 3 free throws. Like, they've seen that kind of playoff intensity, and they've also seen like the bad side of it in the defeats, and hopefully that'll toughen them up for when it actually counts this year. So we'll see.
Prior to moving on to the Spurs, let's stay in the East a bit, because one of the things I messaged you about was just that sort of newly emerging Eastern upper crust, particularly with an eye on the Cavaliers, who, as we've mentioned now, made a large trade, moving Darius Garland for James Harden, bringing Keon Ellis in, getting DeAndre Hunter out of the building as well. If there were to be a team that caused Detroit trouble, are you still picking the Knicks, or do you think that the Cavaliers pose more of a threat to Detroit?
Yeah, secretly, I've never really been thinking it was the Knicks. And I was, maybe way too high on the Cavs before the season started. Nobody really saw the Pistons coming to this level of success. I think I'd picked them to come in either 4th or 5th. And I remember that being a little bit higher than the consensus at the time. Pistons obviously had blown the doors off that, but I had Cavaliers should have won this conference with a bullet in the regular season, I assumed. They started kind of slow, kind of murky, but you know what? They're all the way back up. They're sniffing the 2 seed now. I think they might actually be the 2 seed. And I do think that they are the biggest threat. I do think that the upgrade from Garland to Harden is very important in the short term. I just assume that Garland is cooked, at least in the near future. And the Cavs are very much focused on the here and now, with Mitchell and Mobley and Allen still performing at a decent level, particularly since Harden came over. So if you want to get through New York and you want to get through Detroit, you need to have some bigger bodies, and that small backcourt has gotten eaten alive several postseasons in a row. And I think that they're just being like, yeah, we will trade future promise and quickness for just like, a little bit more strength. They're going to be able to run out some absolutely huge lineups if they want to now, or they can go small and they can run with Harden as a pseudo power forward. This is something that we've seen Harden do plenty of times in his career. And I think that having flexibility is more important than having that one overwhelming strength in the playoffs usually. And Cleveland just gained a lot more by upgrading from Garland to Harden.
Yeah, I think what matters is almost not like the cumulative size, but particularly in a matchup against, let's say, Detroit, where Cade is going to be handling so much of the ball. You are looking at the smallest guy that you're putting out on the floor. And Cleveland have just basically made sure that it's Donovan Mitchell. It's not Darius Garland. You're not presenting yourself with that headache. And James Harden, for all of his defensive faults, is not someone that I see Cade being able to necessarily bully in the post. It's been known for years and years and years. If you ever want to talk about the good side of James Harden's defending, it's the steals that he generates, and it's that famed post defense, which I think you were alluding to there, Mike, as you're mentioning the power forward days, right?
Yeah. And, I think the thing is, like, when Garland failed defensively, it was rarely because he wasn't trying or made mistakes. He just physically couldn't do what he needed to do. Harden's the exact opposite. When he makes mistakes on defense, you're like, my God, what is this guy doing? Where is his head? Why is he out on the court right now? But he's just less vulnerable to to playoff basketball, which tends to be slower, tends to be more physical, tends to be more paint focused than Garland, who's probably a better regular season defender most of the time, I would say.
Yeah, you can just sort of soft switch if James is in there, if Donovan is in there. And Donovan is far more physical than Darius is, and has actually applied himself at the point of attack in the last couple of seasons quite diligently, which is quite a thing to look at.
Yeah, Mitchell's a perfectly fine defender at the 2 guard, I think, right? No one's asking him to be an all defensive candidate, but JB Bickerstaff has a long history of getting his stars to perform at their absolute best on defense, and I think he's done that with Mitchell again.
Yeah, and they're 13-2. Like you said, they're the 2 seed. They're 13-2 in their last 15 games. It's been a slightly soft schedule, but it does seem to be coming together. And I do like some of the additions that they made at the deadline. In terms of looking at that Eastern Conference, what kind of Jayson Tatum do you think needs to come back for Boston for them to actually figure into this in a meaningful way?
I think the conversation around Tatum is all messed up. I think that him coming back will have no impact or only a negative impact on their offense. This is a guy that Celtics already have the best offense in the league for most of the season. I think they're number 2 overall, but you take that away, they're number 1. You can't really get better than best, And I think if you want to make the argument that like, hey, he's going to come in, he's going to be inefficient, but maybe because it pushes like Derek White and Peyton Pritchard down the pecking order a little bit, maybe they can become more efficient. Sure, I'd buy that. That probably nets out to being neutral at best. But where Tatum is really going to be helpful, I think, is defensively. Typically, guys coming back from injury take a little while to find their shot, find their role on offense, particularly in a season like this where Jaylen Brown's assumed to superstar status or ascended to superstar status. Yeah. He's always been willing to share with Jayson Tatum, but he's never thought of himself as lesser than. And certainly that will not be the case going forward anymore. So it's going to take them a while, I think, to find their balance on offense. And it would not surprise me if Tatum immediately makes them worse. But I do think defensively, they've desperately missed his flexibility. I think eventually we're going to get to a point in a playoff series where like Nikola Vucevic is no longer playable. Joe Maz is his brain is going to explode when Vucevic messes up yet again. And I think that's when you turn to Tatum at center minutes that have been a huge part of their defensive kind of off-speed pitch in the past. And I think we're going to see that for 8 minutes a night in the playoffs at least. And that's where they really need that. A guy who can switch, a guy who can hold up defensively at center, but can also switch out on the smaller guards. I think like they've just desperately missed Tatum's defense in his flexibility. Like the Celtics have several good defenders at their position. Not a ton, but several. But Tatum is really the only one who can guard, 2 through 5.
Yeah, and it just depends how ready he is for the sort of like abrasive nature of the postseason as well, because there is a real, again, we're coming back to sort of like that mental side of the game where I certainly would be incredibly conscious of like throwing myself in for a 50-50 contest on the boards, which is something that has been massive for the Boston in the past few years with Tatum. His plus rebounding at the 3-4 has allowed them to be so flexible.
Yeah, great point.
That like skeleton key player. They have turned to small ball lineups already this year, and he does feel like it does feel like the role, if you were to play Tatum at the 5, in which there's the least offensive load on him, you can essentially ask him to assume Al Horford-esque positions, Kristaps Porzingis-esque positions. And when you look at the shot profiles of the 2 J's, you do see that like the primary Jaylen Brown is operating in slightly different areas to primary Jayson Tatum. Like Tatum was more past the 3-point line last year, like 10.3 point attempts per 100 possessions, whereas Jaylen is 6.6. And loads of Jaylen's work this year has come in basically taking advantage of all of that space that Joe Mazzulla's been able to generate for him in the mid-range, just to isolate one-on-one, sort of in a like Shea in the East style. I think a lot of the looks have been fairly similar, where it's like, we're just going to trust you to roast your guy one-on-one. We're going to allow you to get into your shot-making bag. But there is definitely some friction there, because they are essentially Brown is fulfilling the exact same role that Tatum was last year. If Jayson comes back and wants all of those touches back, and I'm not saying that he will, it's just more a case of egos as well as the physical side.
Yeah, and I don't think Tatum is like a particularly, there's the funny joke about the time he comes out and he's like, humbly speaking, I'm one of the best in the game or something like that. But I don't think of Tatum as like an ego-heavy superstar in the way that he's going to demand people kind of, let him immediately resume his old role. I think he has said every correct thing watching the season and the Celtics' success without him. That said, it is going to require a mental and a physical adjustment to playing offense so differently from the way he has to. He's not going to be encouraged to dribble the ball into a step back 3 every time, right? Like he's not going to get to have it in his hands as often as he's used to. And I think just like it's one thing to acknowledge that, and it's another thing to live it. And he won't have a ton of, we'll see when he comes back, but he's not going to have a ton of time to sort of reintegrate himself into the offensive ecosystem before the playoffs start. I don't know. We'll see. It's certainly like the question that looms over the rest of the season from a like, who is going to win the championship standpoint. Because I think if Tatum comes back and he's 80% of what he used to be on offense and 95% of what he was on defense, an already very good Boston team becomes a real threat. But I think that's also a big if. Achilles injuries, we've seen two guys come back from Achilles injuries and be good. Kevin Durant and Dominique Wilkins. And you know what? If you want to be real generous, you could point at Miami's Drew Smith, who made a very similar quick recovery this year.
Recovery as well, right?
But that's not the same caliber of player being asked to do the same kind of things, So I think the history of Achilles injuries just make me very nervous for him making an immediate impact when he comes back, no matter how diligent the rehab.
And I do not, I don't want to get into the slander side of things, but the one time that Tatum has been asked to fulfill this role, probably since 2017-18, is a time that he's been benched in his career, right? Like if you go back to the 24 Olympics, famously just coming off winning a championship, suddenly Tatum was riding the bench for the majority of the games where like we thought, oh, is this going to be Team USA's alpha? Is he going to come in? So there have been sort of shades of this in the past, but I do think you're right, Mike. I think that he is absolutely one of the lower ego superstars, at least publicly facing. I think the interesting questions come irregardless of what happens in the playoffs next season, where they both turn up to training camp and basically see who's wearing which bib. What is it that we're doing here? Are we going to sort of stagger like Houston, James Harden, Chris Paul style? But for now, it's just a really, really interesting wrinkle. I almost wish that Boston didn't get below the tax. So we knew that the Anthony Simons move was purely a basketball decision. But the fact that it aligns with getting below the tax as well, there's still a little bit of doubt in my mind as to how ready Tatum's going to be. But it is certainly interesting. Are there any more teams in the East that you think match up particularly interestingly with Detroit before we want to get on to like San Antonio?
Not that matchup with Detroit.
No one matches up with Detroit. Who is it that you're most interested to see in that like extended playoff setting? Is it Cade? Is it Duren? Is it Thompson? Who's the guy that really takes your fancy on the Pistons?
Oh, it's Thompson. And I was going to bring him up in a conversation with the Spurs later because I think there's a lot of similarities that are going on between Asar Thompson and Steph Castle, where these are two guys who are phenomenal, best-in-class defenders who have had very different kind of offensive evolutions in their short careers. And, Thompson basically missed a whole year with the blood clot issue. I don't have the number offhand, but I don't think they've played a particularly different amount of games. But Thompson still looks so lost on offense all the time. Both him and Amen, I think I'm very disappointed with their lack of development in their handle and their passing ability because I never thought they'd be able to shoot threes. You don't see players who are the non-shooters like that who become ones later. Like even people like to be like, oh, well, Brook Lopez did it or Al Horford did it. And it's like those guys could shoot mid-rangers excellently before they develop a three. These guys have nothing. They're never going to be able to shoot threes. Stop asking them to. But you have to find these other skills on offense. And I think Castle is a guy who has successfully been able to improve his ability to get into the paint with a much tighter handle, with sometimes crazy, but at least more creative passing. And Castle's got plenty of his own turnover problems, but at least he's able to take some swings in a way that keeps the offense flowing in a way I like. And watching both those guys try to adjust to the playoffs and being left, they're already left wide open in the regular season, but just the magnification of the public outcry on it in the playoffs, I think is what can get into their mental side a little bit more.
Which of these players is more likely to be subject to blank needs to be traded tomorrow talk then? Because that could maybe infer which of these teams you think is going to be more successful in the postseason.
I think it's Castle because I think the Spurs are probably still one shooter away from making major noise, and it really needs to be a shooter in the backcourt. And I love Castle. I think he's really good. Like I said, I think his upward trajectory has been very promising. I think his willingness to shoot 3-pointers is important, and he's not terrified like Thompson is to shoot them. But I also think for those reasons, Castle is going to have maybe more trade value. Hard to tell. People are enamored with Asar Thompson, and I totally get why. That Castle's a physical monster, but Thompson's like a generational athlete. But I do think that Castle has some more proven offensive skills in a way that are going to be more appealing to certain teams. And I also think that Detroit's not going to be in a rush to trade Thompson, but I think that the Spurs, depending on what happens this playoffs, if they do surprise me by flaming out early in the playoffs, he'd be the first guy that I think teams would be able to make a call to San Antonio for and ask around a little bit.
And does that align with your personal view? Are you a Harper or Castle guy? Like if you were running the Spurs front office and you were told you can only have one of these guys on the team for the next 10 years, who would be your preference at the moment?
I am surprised by how many very smart basketball minds overwhelmingly say Harper, and like he has lots of great moments. I think my issue is like we've seen Castle playing in prime time with the starters for much of his career, and Harper really hasn't had the opportunity to do that. So it's hard for me to make that strong of a case for Harper, like a lot of people seem to, when he's mostly been going against backups and with, the Spurs reserves. He hasn't had a lot of time with the starting unit, which makes it harder for me to see what his long-term fit would be next to, say, Victor Wembanyama. Like that's how can he flow next to Wembanyama is the most important question. And right now, I think Castle is a better fit. We've seen more of it, so that might not be fair to Harper, but I think like right now, I might be a little tiny bit higher on Castle, but that's mostly because I don't know how to judge what the Harper Wemby two-man game looks like in the way that I can a Castle Wemby two-man game.
Yeah, of course. And like when we're comparing Alsar Thompson and Castle, just to put a bow on it, they have incredibly different offensive concepts. Obviously, if Castle is playing next to Harper or playing next to, like even De'Aaron Fox, he's a much better spacer shooter than either of the two that we've just mentioned there. He's always had sort of Wemby to operate with at the 5, who is a cheat code in terms of throwing those lobs. Luke Cornett is an incredibly serviceable, if not like plus backup that you can have to operate as like another pick and roll partner. So it has been like really nice context for Castle, whereas Thompson, as we've mentioned, they don't have spacing anyway. Like Jalen Duren is another guy who has experienced a lot of on-ball usage this year and has been really, really impressive with it, particularly like at the start of the season. But Sam Vecini and Bryce Simon, and Bryce covers the Pistons and has done for years and years, constantly moan about the fact that they're both occupying the same spaces and there's not really room for both of them on the court. But like the Spurs have the chance to have Castle in a situation where he is the one spacing concern, or maybe like the 1.5 spacing concern if you're playing a Carter Bryant, or if Harrison Barnes is finding the lights too bright that game. But they are different contexts and they are different players. Like Castle very, very famously put himself out there as a point guard, said, I don't want to be drafted to your organization unless I'm playing as a point guard. And that's proven to be a really, really good decision on his part. Whereas poor Alsar has always had to sort of fill in the gaps around our men as well. So it will be interesting. But this does bring us to the Spurs, who, like you said, have a really good chance at like an outside chance at getting the 1 seed this year, have well and truly arrived. And who were you higher on prior to the season? Were you a Detroit or a Spurs guy? Because personally, I was in a very similar situation to you, where I thought that Detroit would either stay in the same position as previous season or regress slightly because everyone likes a big move. And then with the Spurs, it was incredibly hard to quantify because of the injuries, because of Fox coming in and not sort of getting to see it. I did not expect them to be challenging as a 1 or 2 seed. So I'm glad to be wrong, because they've been incredibly fun to watch this year. But were you at all higher on the Spurs, or has this been a pleasant surprise to you as well?
Yeah, I'm trying to look at where I put the Spurs in the preseason, because I put Detroit 4 or 5. I had the Spurs like 9, 10, 11. Yeah. And this was nothing against Wembanyama, who I thought was going to be an MVP candidate. I looked at the construction of this team and I thought, and I was totally wrong about this, but I looked at the construction of this team and I was like, every single player they're putting around Wembanyama, basically besides De'Aaron Fox, is a defense first player. And like, to my eyes, I'm like, you can put a bunch of offense first guys, and with Wembanyama, you'll still be a very good defense, but you'd be hopefully an amazing offense. And I was like, I still struggled with like trying to make that make sense to me conceptually. Be like, why are you bolstering your strength when your team is going to have real problems scoring? But I think De'Aaron Fox has been better than I expected, not just shooting the 3-pointer, but just in general, he's improved as the season has gone on. I did not pick him as an all-star, but I was glad he got the recognition as an injury replacement, because I think he's been like very willing to adapt to his circumstances. Like he's played off ball next to Castle. Occasionally he plays off ball next to Harper. Like he's gained chemistry with Wembanyama. It's still ongoing, but he's gained chemistry with Wembanyama as the season's gone along. And I think they've been able to get just enough shooting from their front court between Wembanyama and, my favorite Julian Champagny. And, Harrison Barnes has been benched, but he's still been a fairly capable shooter from outside in a way that defenses have to at least pay attention to him. They've been able to get enough shooting from those guys to kind of counteract the poor shooting from outside. And the defense has been fantastic, with or without Wembanyama, because there are some measures that say Luke Cornett is a top 5 interior defender in the NBA as well. So going from Wembanyama to Cornett, it was just like completely fixed the issue of the defense falling apart when Wembanyama's not on it, which I always like that move. The rest of it didn't make sense to me, and I was wrong. Like the Spurs are awesome. they're still more of a defensive team. The offense has been able to do enough. And I've been so impressed with the way that the rest of the supporting cast has kind of stepped up this year and the way they've fit together that in ways that didn't make sense on paper.
Yeah, but you are right to point out that they do mirror the Pistons in a big way with that sort of physical dominance, and it is in a slightly different way. I think they're less likely to win in a bar fight, but in terms of sort of like some of the dexterity and the on-court speed, the way that they've been able to sort of harass and harangue ball handlers, and then like they seem to be the kryptonite to OKC earlier in the season because they did just have so many driving threats from the perimeter, as well as that big Frenchman in the middle. Also, French Vanilla, best thing to come out of the NBA season by far. Just too good a nickname to ever question. Just lock it home. Cornet has to remain a Spur while Wemby's on the team. I would say, and I don't think that this is groundbreaking analysis. I think that the Spurs themselves are a better basketball team than Detroit, but they find themselves in a more difficult conference, which makes it incredibly hard to pick who I would have as more likely to win a championship.
I disagree with that. I think the Pistons are probably better than the Spurs overall. Okay. But I also think you're right that like their path is way easier than San Antonio's. So like if they're comparable teams, which no matter who you prefer, they're probably both comparable. You're going to go with the one that doesn't have to go through Denver and Oklahoma City to get out of the West, right? Yes. And so, yeah, I think definitely Detroit will have an easier path. And I just think Detroit's a better team than the Spurs. I think we need to see what the Spurs look like in the playoffs very badly. Like Detroit, we need to see it too, but like the Spurs, a lot of these guys are going to be experiencing their first taste of like really meaningful NBA action, and I'm pretty pumped for that.
And like Wemby is the ideal star to probably like forge your roster around because every other option as a team build remains on the table. And the Spurs have chosen or sort of have lucked into this roster build where you have loads of driving from the perimeter. And like you said, Mike, they've chosen to go with a lot of defense first guys around Wemby, which seems a little counterintuitive prior to the season. We could absolutely see a reorientation post this postseason to a more offensively slanted team around Wemby, or, you know, perhaps it all works. Perhaps they're a defensive juggernaut and you're basically asking Victor Wembanyama to do his Tim Duncan 2003 and pre-impression for the next couple of years, shouldering a ton of load in the middle of the court, around the post, and again beyond the arc, I guess. So which of the teams in the West do you think could cause the Spurs the most trouble?
I would be curious, like obviously Denver, obviously Oklahoma City. But like, I think that downwards, I'm still much higher on Minnesota, I think, than I probably should be. This is a team that I think is so solid 1 through 7, and then it starts to fall off a little bit, right? But I think their top 7 is basically as good as anybody else's in a way that translates more to playoffs than regular season. We've just seen that Anthony Edwards plus Rudy Gobert works in the playoffs. 2 straight Western Conference Finals against some very tough teams is no joke. It's not an accident. And, you know, I have a little bit more to say about Anthony Edwards later, but he has just turned into such a good shooter from outside that it makes everything else on this team work in a way that would have been inconceivable 3 or 4 years ago. And I think that watching Minnesota, I watch more Minnesota than almost any other team every year, because every year they're a new permutation. Every year they're fascinating to me. And there are ways you can talk yourself into them beating any team in a 7-game series. And there are ways you could talk yourself into them losing to any team in a 7-game series in the first round, or as it may be in the play-in. So like but I do think that like out of all the lower tier teams outside of the top 3 we've already mentioned, like that's the one that has by far the highest ceiling.
Yeah, absolutely. Proper dark horse, have made the conference finals in the last 2 seasons and continues to ascend. They're not relying on Mike Conley for point guard minutes anymore. Or I mean, you know, maybe 8 to 10 minutes a night for the statesman of the team, I guess. But they are just, you mentioned with the Cavaliers, versatility is key. And they're sort of like this guerrilla warfare unit that can run at pace, that can create from different angles. They don't necessarily have that helio ball handler, which was some of the criticism of Ant maybe a couple of seasons ago, that it was just going to be a hell of a lot of Anthony Edwards with the ball thrust into his hands and no one else being able to do anything. But I think he does quite a lot of good work off ball as well. Then you throw in Dante DiVincenzo, who is one of the premier shooters that's not paid like an all-star in the NBA. Dasumu's been shooting 45% from three this year. And then Jaden McDaniels, all hell Jaden McDaniels, right? Like one of the lesser heralded players in the league and one of the bargain contracts in the league as well. They've got a lot of length, they've got a lot of physicality, and they seem to be two words that keep cropping up on today's podcast. It's all about length and physicality in today's NBA, right?
Yeah, they could just, so easily transform. They can go one big 4 out, super small ball if they wanted to. If they wanted to put Naz Reid at center and have, I guess 5 out in that case. Or they could go 3 giants plus Jaden McDaniels, plus Anthony Edwards. Like they can go as big or as small as you need. I think being relatively top heavy, you only trust 7, maybe 7.5 players on that roster. Makes them vulnerable to injury in a way that some of these other teams aren't quite as bad. But truthfully, like when the top of the West especially is so loaded, like Oklahoma, I think, records aside, I think Oklahoma City is so good. I think Denver is so good. Everybody is vulnerable to even a medium-sized injury. So, like, yes, depth is super important, but even an injury to your 3rd or 4th best guy could just sink your hopes when you're in the second round of the playoffs or further on. So it's not really that exciting to say that about anybody.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, we're seeing it with Denver at the moment. Aaron Gordon carrying hamstring injuries. It is so often just a matter of who's healthiest come playoff time. But in terms of these matchups, if we're just going through the Spurs' viability as a team to beat the newcomer curse, because that was the claim, right, Mike? Like they are uniquely positioned in a matchup against the Nuggets. Do you take San Antonio or do you take the best basketball player in the world and all of that experience and what's your thinking on that at the moment?
I would still lean Denver. I think their advantages against Denver are different than their advantages against the Thunder, where you can see them. Like you mentioned earlier, right? Like the thing about the Thunder is like the Spurs' best attribute is they have so much ball handling up and down the roster. I shouldn't say up and down the roster, but on the court at any given time. When you have 3 very talented guards, plus your center can handle as well as Wembanyama can, like you're just going to be able to attack from so many different angles that it's hard for even a defense like the Thunder's to kind of go to defend. Against the Nuggets, it's a little bit different. It's like, where does Nikola Jokic hide? Who is he going to be able to guard? Because you're not going to want to put him against a guy like Julian Champagnie, I don't think. I think Champagnie's just too good of a 3-point shooter. I think he's too fast in transition. I think that's going to be true for any of the guards, of course. Like some people are like, oh, put your center on Steph Castle. It's not going to work when that center is Jokic, I don't think. I think Steph Castle is just going to go right by him like a turnstile, And Wembanyama is going to be tough too. Wembanyama spends so much time on the perimeter. So I think the Spurs are kind of uniquely positioned to give the Nuggets matchup fits in a way that very few other teams can. So if they're able to upset the Nuggets, and I would still pick the Nuggets and I would still pick the Thunder, I think, but I wouldn't feel good about those. We've seen what they can do to the Thunder, and so we'll see.
Would you go into game 1 with Wemby guarding Jokic, or would you be tempted to go double big with Cornet out there next to him?
I think you start with who got you there to see. If you can survive, like you're always best off making the other team adjust first, in my opinion. If you think you're good enough with your starting 5 to try that first, I think you do. And I think, the Cornet, the problem is Jokic is such a problem solver. You start with Cornet on Jokic and Wemby roaming off of him, and it works. It'll work great for a game, maybe a game and a half. And then suddenly the Nuggets will figure out your counter, and that was your best shot. Now you got nothing left. So that's what makes me nervous is I think you got to try to test might against might first and adjust from there if you need to. But I'm always in favor of like just trying to make the other team adjust first.
I would look forward to the game 7, Carter Bryant, get out there, give Jokic hell for 12 minutes, sort of a la Caruso last year.
That would be fun.
Yeah, he has just amazed me this year. Like he seemed to have emerged in the last 10, 12, 15 or so games, only playing spot minutes. But for the NBA nerds out there that don't necessarily just love a step back 3, an alley-oop, a crossover, I feel like Carter Bryant is giving us the equivalent defensive mixtape at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, this is like the time of year where smart teams are playing their young guys a lot, not to keep, the stars healthy or in ship shape or whatever, although that's part of it, but it's because you need to have options in the playoffs, like we've said. Yeah. And you need Carter Bryant to know what it feels like to be playing high leverage minutes. You need him to know what it feels like to guard point guards. You need him to know what it feels like to guard centers in a game setting, not in practice. And so you're going to see a lot of weird lineups these last few weeks. And I think people are always like, oh, it's just like the dog days of summer. But no, this is coaches seeing who's going to survive when it really matters. I think too much, not enough weight is given to experimentation in kind of the last dog days of the NBA regular season. And at least for people who are paying really close attention, I think it's really fascinating. And oftentimes it's sort of a precursor to what you're going to see in the playoffs or what you're not going to see,
Yeah, exactly. If something doesn't work, you'd much rather know it then than in the first round or game 3, 4 of a series. Mike, there's barely any basketball to watch. It's all this tanking issue. There are barely any games on League Pass, whereas we're talking about you've got to go and check out and see if Carter Bryant can do it in late March, early April, in time for the NBA Finals. I think that we've probably covered Detroit and San Antonio quite nicely here. It sounds as though are the Pistons currently your pick to come out of the East?
They are, yeah. And I'm totally prepared for them to shoot 14% from 3 as a team and lose to the Knicks in the second round now. But right now, I think it's crazy the way that Detroit is disrespected as a not likely to get out of the East, but not as an overwhelming favorite to get out of the East. I think that's just not paying attention to both the numbers and the on-court product.
Yeah, because at the moment they've curb stomped the conference. One thing that is perhaps less predictable, and one thing that you also wanted to speak about was the MVP and the Rookie of the Year race. Which of those races are taking your fancy anymore? More than the other one at the moment?
They're both fun because I think they're both different than they have been in years past. And so we can start with MVP, where it's always been some permutation of the big 4 recently, right? It's been SGA, it's been Jokic, it's been Giannis, it's been Joel Embiid in a lot of cases. And this year, because of injuries, because of elevation of some play and degradation of others, I think it's going to be a way more fun conversation from the top on down. And, SGA, overwhelming favor right now. He's missed 7 or 8 games, and he's going to miss a handful more. You start to wonder, is he going to be able to make it to the 65-game limit? Yep. But let's just assume he's in. He's the likely MVP winner. But in the past, spots 2, 3, and 4 have basically been locked up in some order. We're going to have new names in most of these spots, I think, because, all the old ones are out. It's Steph Curry's going to be out. Joel Embiid's out. Jokic can't miss a single another game. And I don't think Jokic cares about MVP at all. I think if he's tired at the end of the season, he's happy to take 1 or 2 games off just to make sure he's ready for the playoffs. So I think he's probably going to miss. Doncic is flirting with missing. That's the other name I was missing. Yeah. So Doncic is a regular. He's flirting with missing the cutoff. So I was looking at it today and I'm you're going to get some combination of at least 3 of these guys in Victor Wembanyama, who's pretty close to missing the cutoff himself. Donovan Mitchell, Jalen Brunson, Cade Cunningham, Anthony Edwards, Kawhi Leonard, maybe he's missed 13, but he's certainly playing like it. Tyrese Maxey, Kevin Durant, Jaylen Brown. There's going to be some really fun debates kind of going through there. So I'll pause there and let you think. Have you thought about this at all? Who would be on your MVP ballot if we were to get there?
I thought about it prior to the season, and I did a podcast with Charlie Cummings where we did our long shot MVP picks. Our long shot award picks, and MVP obviously headlines that. And I very, very proudly trotted out Kevin Durant. And I believe he would have been 100-1 at the start of the season to finish top 5. So burner accounts aside, I have my investment there. But it's so difficult with the cutoff. I think that if you made me choose today, I would probably be going, let's say Jokic stays in. Let's say, like we said, the 2 stay in. So some order of Jokic and SGA, and then
let's take Jokic out because I think let's just for fun, just because he'll be 1 or 2 if he stays in without question. Let's say SGA is in, Doncic is in, Jokic is out.
Okay, so I would probably assume that Luka would finish 2 because as we get to that sort of stage of the season, the box score stats start to really sort of take hold of the online discussion. And someone is going to load up NBA.com and see that Luka is leading the league in scoring, see that the Lakers have a massive plus record. There'll be arguments made about their clutch time performance. And I can see Luka coming away with 2 as opposed to 1. I think that there is a real narrative case for Jaylen Brown. Jaylen is probably... I'm saying that. I mean, the Pistons are going to win nearly 60 games and Cade is the offensive engine. So let's go Luka 2, Cade 3, Jalen 4, and Wemby 5. Because there's a bias towards the teams that are winning at the top of their conference. I don't think the vibes have been quite right for Jalen Brunson owing to that sort of like horror show of a January. It'd feel weird for Mitchell to get there given sort of the state of the Cavaliers season. And I think so much of this discussion is almost had in the first 20 games of the season. When a voter comes back round to look at it, they'll go, "Oh, I can't have Donovan Mitchell. They were 500 when I last checked the standings." So yeah, I would lean SGA, Luka, Cade, Jalen, and Victor. How does that align with yours, Mike?
Pretty close. I kind of assume when Wembanyama's going to miss, he's missed 14. He's only got 3 more, give or take, before he's out. If Wemby's in, I think I'd have the same top 3. I'd have SGA, Doncic, and Wemby. You had Wemby 5, I think, right? So I'd probably have him 3rd. But I left him out when I made my original ballot, and I had SGA, Doncic. I actually had Donovan Mitchell 3rd for my personal voting, and I had Cade Cunningham 4. And I actually thought those were pretty clear cut for me. I think Mitchell's season has been just unbelievable. And you're right. People weren't paying attention because they started kind of funky. There's been some weird vibes with the Garland stuff. But he was first team All NBA last season, and he's playing way better than that this year. Way better. Scoring way up, efficiency way up. He's scoring more and shooting more efficiency than Jalen Brunson or Tyrese Maxey. He's a much better defender than both those guys. So he just clears flat out. And his team is better than both right now. There's no argument for either of them.
Signal as well, right?
Yep. And he's an on-off god. Practically Jokician right now. And I just think like if you flipped him with any of the guys below him, I think the team would be as good or better. Cunningham's a close 4, and you're seeing a lot after last night. Of course, I made these notes a couple days ago, and as of last night, you're seeing a lot of people being like, "Oh, well, should Cade Cunningham be the real MVP?" And I'm not ready to get there yet, but we've talked about Cunningham a lot already with the Pistons. I just could not be higher. I thought those 4 were pretty easy. 5th was hard. I think Kawhi Leonard has a real case. I just can't give it to him because this is most valuable player, not best player. And if your existence is the reason the team gave up on the season, and I largely think that the aspiration stuff is why, like you're not the most valuable player. You made your team worse. So I can't give it to Kawhi. Durant has a statistical case. I'm going to freeze his candidacy for a couple weeks just to make sure the burner stuff doesn't have any fallout. So I feel your love for him. The on-court stuff is still impressive, but I need to wait to see what happens, if anything, from that. And that left me with, and Jaylen Brown's had a really nice year, as you pointed out. I think my choice for 5th has actually had a very similar season in Anthony Edwards. Mm-hmm. He would take my last ballot spot. I think Brown is arguably a better playmaker, arguably a more consistent and threatening on-ball defender. They both kind of have off-ball defensive issues that come with being kind of the star guard where, your effort will wane when you're not on the ball on both sides of the court, and but I think like Edwards' ceiling is just a little bit higher because his 3-point shooting is such a threat. Like he's able to space the floor even when he doesn't have the ball in his hands in a way that Jalen can't right now. He's had to work through a very crowded Minnesota team, and he's still able to generate efficient offense. I'd like to see him be a little bit better of a finisher. I've always thought that's a little strange about Edwards, but perhaps it's just due to the lack of spacing around him. And, if Minnesota ends up being a play-in team and we see a big surge from a Jaylen Brown or a Jalen Brunson down the stretch, then maybe I'll feel differently. I don't feel good about this pick at all. But right now, I think Edwards is probably the last pick on my ballot.
And completely defensible as well. Like Ant is like a star of the league. He's a face of the league. I think his play style is perhaps a little bit more alluring to the average fan than Jaylen Brown. Although Jaylen has very well and truly put a lot of amazing highlights on tape, like pure scorer highlights this year. Ant has had a couple of real signature performances as well, like the 55 against the Spurs is something that we'll be speaking about for the rest of his career, at least like when his career is all said and done. Has there been a particular evolution to his game this year? Because this is the thing with Anthony Edwards. It seems to really, really impress us at the end of a season, during the postseason, go away and then add a new facet to his game. Like a couple of years ago, I thought the handle completely leveled up and then the shooting leveled up. Has there been anything in Ant's game, or has everything just sort of crystallized together this year for you?
I think the big one is his turnover rate is way down. His assist rate is down a little bit too. I think the ball has been a little bit more egalitarian in a good way for Minnesota, where you're seeing Randall's just more comfortable in his own skin. He's more comfortable on the team. He's more comfortable with what he should be doing. But I think that you've just even Gobert has been a bigger part of the offense than he has been in the past. And I think that it's kind of a conscious decision from Ant that hey, I can cede some responsibility, guys, which is not what I expected, given we knew Conley was going to be on the downslope. We knew they didn't have a strong answer at the point guard position. I kind of thought, if anything, it would be more Ant this year, not less. And I think that's to his credit. He's become a much more efficient scorer. But I think just taking a half step back in on-ball usage has been beneficial to him. And I think that's, a sign of mental maturity as much as anything. And I think that's something that we've seen him struggle with in the past. So
I think there's one of my favorite things that I listened to over the summer, again, Thinking Basketball podcast. They were going through the 25 greatest peaks of the 2000s. And in the Manu Ginobili episode, they made the point that the most interesting thing, that the real value to Manu was the fact that he didn't necessarily have a spot on the floor. It's just his spot was being moved off his spot, and it was adapting to the newest situation. And I think there was perhaps a fear 12 to 18 months ago with the makeup of the Timberwolves that I thought Edwards was about to get quite Harden-esque, particularly with the rise in 3-point volume and the development of the handle. I saw a very, very clear path to plus 30-point scoring seasons and 10, 11, 12 threes a game. And it does just seem that there has been a little bit more of a, like you said, a lessening of the on-ball responsibility, but also a widening in his spheres of influence on the court. He can operate from so many different levels of the floor now, and he can operate from both the standstill and off of curls, off of movement as well, which is something that I think will continue to make him one of the best playoff offensive players that we see. I thought by the end of last year, he was dealing with the doubles and he was dealing with the pick and roll coverage completely fine, and it's just a matter of what your teammates do around that. I am interested to see what it looks like this year. I think he was the most blitzed player in the league last year. I don't know what those stats are looking like now, but that's probably the final evolution that mainstream media is looking for out of his game. What decisions does he make in those real high intensity moments, in those moments where he's being forced off the ball, getting out of the game that he is sort of fostered over the past 12 months? What does it look like? Or has the fact that he's stepped back from this on-ball usage actually made it a little bit more difficult to do that to Minnesota this time around in the playoffs?
Yeah, no notes.
Rookie of the year was the conversation, and then that gets us into Charlotte. And I was very ready to message you with Charlotte, because if you're watching a lot of the Timberwolves, I consistently find myself, when I can't sleep at night or when I'm waking up in the morning getting ready to download a game to go into work, I want to watch me some LaMelo Ball. I want to watch me some Con. I want to watch me some Brandon Miller these days. So let's talk about the Rookie of the Year race. This is probably the most interesting Rookie of the Year race we've had since, I don't know, Ben Simmons and Mitchell.
Yeah, where they were wearing T-shirts, snubbing each other and stuff. That was
exactly where it was the you're a fake rookie, it shouldn't count argument. I suppose Chet and Wemby was really good, and that was another. There was shades of that as well, and that's almost reminiscent of this race a little bit, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I think there's been some more interest. There's been some interesting Rookie of the Year races, but there's rarely been one that's quite like this, where it's Cooper Flag, overwhelming favorite coming into the year, has pretty much lived up to every expectation you could possibly have put upon him. Even the 3-point shooting, 30% on the year, not great, but he's 38% in his last 20 games on 4 triples per match. That's very promising, I think. Yep. Constant improvement has been a hallmark of his, dating back to his Duke days, dating back to his high school days, where he could barely hit a jumper of any kind before, and now he's relies pretty heavily on some nice touch in the mid-range.
Yep.
27 and 4 plus 2 stocks per game is very impressive box score production. And it's not like the Mavericks are a laughing stock. They are not good. They're a tanking team, but they're not, the Wizards or the Jazz or the other teams that, fans love to make fun of. Flag's ceiling is unbelievable. But on the other hand, we have someone who come in who's playing not like a rookie at all, and that's Con Knippel, who is putting up things that look positively Steph Currian. I believe he's the only high volume shooter who is shooting at least 40% from both corners, both shoulders, and above the break. Everywhere around the arc, he is shooting at least 40%, which is outrageous, insane. He has no weaknesses as a three-point threat, really as a mid-range threat either. As a jump shooter, he has no weaknesses. He can do it off the catch. He can do it off the bounce, which is something he really struggled with in college. It doesn't matter. And he's big enough and strong enough. I think the defense has actually been more solid than I expected. Not in the ways I expected. I thought maybe he could be sort of like almost like a James Harden defender where he'd get blown by, but he's big, strong dude. He can hold his own in the post. It actually hasn't been that's caught my eye. He's really good off the ball, chasing guys around screens and stuff like that. He tries really hard. He's not a fast athlete, but he's a fairly fluid one. He's able to stay attached to these guys a lot more than you would expect. And he's really at his worst when he's guarding somebody on the ball and they're just going to, be able to use their quickness to get by him. But I think sorry, what were you saying?
No, he's just like a peel switch defender, isn't he?
Yeah.
That's exactly the in vogue movement right now. And he's a guy with the physical build that can adapt to guarding a couple of positions over the course of a 24-second possession. So has been more impressive. Where are you leaning, Mike? Because
it's tough. And I'm going to ask you the same question because I think Flag, I came in assuming he'd be the rookie of the year, and he's hit every box you could ask him for. Even though Knippel's box score stuff is still very good, 19 points a game, 5.5 rebounds, 3.5 assists. His, case is about the efficiency, about the advanced stats that just love Knippel, about the transferability of a skill set. He fits anywhere next to anybody. And he's doing this for a team that's looking quite feisty in the playoff picture all of a sudden. I'm really going to have to let this one marinate. I'm seeking more opinions than my own because I do think
if you would like guidance, I'll come out and I'll plant my flag on Knippel Island.
Okay.
So I would make the case for Knippel largely due to the fact that I would say up until this point of the season, they're at pretty much a dead heat where Knippel shaded the first 25 to 25 or so games. Flag really came into his own when he stopped having to play point guard and has really, like you said, discovered his shooting stroke, 38% in the last 20 or so games. But the Mavericks have lost 9 in a row. And given that this is the only year they have complete control of their pick, I believe for the next 3 or maybe even 4 seasons, I don't necessarily see that changing. And given the upward swing that Con has been a massive, massive part of in Charlotte, and he is immediately playing for a team that I think will factor into the postseason. You look at, we spoke about the top end of the Eastern Conference. That middle sector is, it evokes a smell in the nose. I really think, you look at the Hornets, they are going to be the form team in that play-in, and I think that they could end up playing either the Pistons or the Celtics in a series if they come out of that play-in tournament. I mean, the Knicks could figure into it as well. And I think that they're going to put up a major fight. And I can't really get past the fact that in terms of the counting stats, I know that Connor's had less responsibility. They are fairly similar. Con is playing for a winning team. Con is 2 threes away, at least prior to last night. He's 2 threes away from leading the league in threes made. Keegan Murray before this was the rookie that made the most threes of any rookie in NBA history. Con is competing to take the crown off of I think it's Donovan Mitchell that's 2 ahead of him. But this has been a reward. This has been a reward that has purely been reserved for Steph Curry and Edwards in the last 5-10 years or so. And he's come in and he is really lifting the voodoo off of the Charlotte Hornets, has really helped turn that franchise around. And I think he's going to be contributing to winning basketball for the majority of his career. And poor old Coop, if you're on Charlotte, it's an amazing context. It's a context that is multitudes better than what he's in now. But I think we've got to wait a season or so for winning basketball from Cooper Flag, not owing to his play, but owing to his team. So I'm going to tax him a little bit on that, and I'm going to give it to Knippel.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think, it is so hard to take a rookie out of their environment and think about them neutrally, because if you switched Knippel and Flag, I think Flag would be way more efficient. He'd be around an ecosystem that's better fit for him. It's not even that I think the Hornets are that much more talented than the Mavericks. I just think the pieces on Charlotte are more conducive to a new high volume piece than the pieces on Dallas were, right? Like you had Cooper playing point guard for 15 games. Then he went back to playing point guard for 10 more games. And he's like, he's purposefully being stretched in ways that are going to let him, be stretched further later on, right? Like he's being stretched now so that he can be more limber later on in his career and be better, but not in ways that are necessarily conducive to him winning Rookie of the Year. So I think about that a little bit too in a neutral team. Flag, you just look at Flag, you think he'd probably be better, but it's hard to say that. Knipple just fits everywhere. So I don't know. I'm going to think about this one more. But I do want to talk a little bit about the Hornets too.
Yeah, let's go full Hornets. Do you agree with me that in the mire that is the Eastern Conference play-in race, they are one of the 2 picks to get out of it?
Well, I don't know, and I'm confused about the Hornets. So let me throw some numbers at you, okay? And then you can help me sort through my feelings. So a lot of their praise for the Hornets is on their recent run. Before their loss to the Rockets last night, they'd won 11 out of 12. So now 11 out of 13. Opponents are shooting 34% against them from 3 in that stretch, while the Hornets are shooting 40%. Last night, the Rockets still shot just 28%, and the Hornets were 33%. So still +4, +5 percentage points over the opponent every night. Mm-hmm. I think, if you're looking for positives first, the offense has been 8th in the league since November 28th, which is a date I picked because that's about when Brandon Miller came back. That's about when they started looking competent. Their winning streak didn't start until, late December, but after November 28th, they started to look like a real team. Offense is 8th in that stretch, but the defense is 5th. I am hard pressed to think that they have been the 5th best defense in the league since Thanksgiving. There's a few reasons for that, right? They're allowing the fewest corner threes. Great. Structural. That's something that you can replicate in the playoffs. But they are terrible at forcing turnovers, and they're terrible at keeping hold of the ball. Like they're bottom 5 giving away turnovers. They're bottom 5 taking turnovers. The flip side is they are top 5 on the glass on both sides. Very interesting to me. I don't think of them as a team with overwhelming rebounders, but they just LaMelo being so big is helpful. Knipple's a plus positional rebounder. Diabate scratches and claws for everything when he's out there. I was a little surprised that they're 15th in free throw rate, which isn't because they're generating many free throws. It's because they're shooting 82% from the line as a team, which is second best in the league. I don't know that would hold up in a postseason setting. Not the accuracy, but just in general, getting any free throws at all. This is not a team that puts a lot of pressure on the rim.
No, that's true.
And then you look at the starting lineup. Knipple, Miller, Ball, Bridges, Diabate when he's not being suspended for throwing wild punches. Plus 30 net rating and 479 possessions smells bad to me. Sure. They're shooting 46% from deep as a group, that starting unit in 479 possessions. That's not going to last. They've got some good wins. They beat San Antonio. They beat Houston. They beat Philly by trillion. They beat the Lakers. They beat UKC. But that's basically the list. The vast majority of their wins are against really bad teams. I think that they are going to be very vulnerable defensively, despite what the stats say. I think that LaMelo's done pretty well this year. I think going around screen, chasing, trying. But guys don't have realized, I think, you don't have to go around LaMelo. You go through him. Nobody is weaker in the chest than LaMelo Ball. It's insane. I really like them. They're so fun to watch. Knipple and Miller, having 2 guys that are comfortable on and off the ball around your lead ball handler and LaMelo Ball opens up so many doors because you can use Ball as an off, flying around off the ball, catching threes off flare screens and shooting his 1-foot fadeaway 3-pointers from 29 feet for no reason. Both these guys, all 3 of those guys can be used in very creative ways. They run a million guard-to-guard screens. Miles Bridges sucks as a human. He shoots some horrible shots and takes some bad turnovers, but at least he seems like he's accepted being the 4th option.
Yes.
But winning cures a lot of ills. We're going to see, they've also been healthy during the stretch, which is so important because, we know they stink when Miller's not out there. We know they stink when LaMelo Ball's not out there. So there's a lot of things that make me feel like this is promising, but a little bit of a house of cards. Sorry, I threw a real lot at you there.
No. On the shooting, 2 things. Prior to this season, last year, prior to LaMelo's season-ending injury, LaMelo and Brandon were the duo that were taking the most 3-point attempts in NBA history. They're averaging about 23 3-point attempts per game between the 2 of them, just cool. Steph and Clay. And at the same time last year, and this really shocked me because I confessed either prior to the pod or just at the start, Charlotte have been a fascination of mine for the last couple of years. I remember looking at their drop off because I think they made a nice start last year. They beat Houston in on opening night, and it was a really, really fun win. They were 13th in defensive rating up until LaMelo's injury, up until they basically threw in the season for the tank and eventually got Con. I do think that the Charles Lee system, which will be heavily influenced by the Joe Mazzulla system, because that's where he was a lead assistant prior, I do think that it is insulating subpar defensive talent, because like you said, there's decent size there. They can compete on the glass, but between them, no one's doing many sets at the gym, right? Like Con is probably the most stout guy in that starting lineup, aside from Miles Bridges for position. Brandon Miller's thin, LaMelo's thin. I do just wonder if for the play-in, it's weird. Orlando always turns it up for the play-in, and they will be overwhelmingly physical.
Yeah, that's going to be a fun potential matchup for sure. The styles makes fights, etc.
Yeah, they've killed the Hawks in the past 2 seasons as well, just by being overly physical. I'm happy that the Hornets have that the rebounding in the locker. And then, what do you think the score would be? Miami versus Charlotte, because the pace of that game, we're looking at sort of 1980s Denver Nuggets, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean the Heat are allowing if you're looking at just pure points per game, they're allowing 118 points per game or something. I saw which somehow is not the worst. One of the teams, let me see if I can find this real fast. Oh, the Jazz are allowing 126 points per game.
Wow.
So that, we don't really look at points per game usually, right? We're usually looking at ratings and stuff like that. But it is sometimes crazy to look and be like, yeah, you're right. They're 80s Nugget styles out here every game. 126 points per game, which for the record is 3 worse than the next worst team, which is the Wizards. I mean, going back to your question though, if the play-in right now would be Orlando, what a sad fate. Miami, Atlanta, Charlotte, and I think those 4 teams plus the 76ers are going to be kind of the 5 that are in the mix.
Yep.
It's hard for me to say. I just want to say that the Heat will escape. They always seem to, even when they shouldn't, even when they stink in the real playoffs. It seems like they always get out of the play-in. And, they're as inconsistent a team as there's been in the league this year, but I still think they'd get out. After that, though, would you really favor the Magic, especially if Franz just never comes back, if his ankles are just mysteriously broken for the rest of the year? You're not gonna pick the Magic over the Hornets, are you? I don't know.
I know, Suggs is such a swing in that game as well, because if you went, I love the Miller Ball Knipple combination, but Ant Black, Jalen Suggs, and Desmond Bain is incredibly fun as well. And I almost wonder if I know that Paolo is the opposite of a plus minus god, plus minus demon in all the wrong ways. But I do wonder if 3 guards around him at the 4 and then Wendell at the 5, that's quite a nice lineup. Maybe he can find himself there a little bit. No, I'll stick with it. I do like the Hornets, and I really hope that they get playoff experience. And we do know, owing to some of those signature wins that you've mentioned over the Spurs, particularly over OKC, if you're going to pick a shooting variance team, pick the Charlotte Hornets.
Yeah, I mean, at least you can rely upon Knipple, if nothing else, to hit his threes. So,
yeah, and LaMelo is one of the more talented 3-point scorers in the league. Miller is incredibly talented from 3. Like we were saying pre-pod, Salon has just got to get it together, and all of a sudden they're one hell of an unstoppable team. This transitions us right towards the end of our podcast, because I was going to ask Mike. There's been loads of tanking chat, and how do we save tanking? And I do not want to get into all the umpteen solutions that could be done. The granny's footsteps, whoever touches Adam Silver first gets first pick without him turning around and seeing you.
What is granny's footsteps? Is that a
UK reference? That one person is turned round, all the others trying to creep up on them. If that person's let's park that for now. My UK audience will have loved that reference. One of the ways we can sort of reveal what we would like to happen with the tanking situation is just talking about this year and talking about who are your 3 teams that you'd like to see in the top 3? Because then we can almost reverse engineer it. Like who would you like to see get a franchise changing talent come the off season?
Yeah. So, I think people initially hear this question. They're like, oh, I want to reward the ethical tankers. And I just think that's a stupid term. I don't understand what it means. Are we going to say that like the Kings are ethical tankers because they tried to be good and they are just the worst team in the league by so much? Like, I don't know that makes sense to me. I don't want to send them the best player in the draft. I don't want to send them, whoever, Darren Peterson and seal that guy's fate for the rest of his NBA career. And yet, that said, the Kings are still my first pick anyway, and it has nothing to do with the team, which doesn't deserve it. And it's just the fans. Like, there's just nothing else on this team to root for. And today for Basketball Poetry, I wrote about like why you should watch each of the remaining or each of the tanking teams for the remaining season. Like, what's worth tuning in for? What would be fun about it? And I had a whole long section about how awesome Dylan Cardwell has been for them, and how I just love watching this guy play center. I actually compare him to Moussa Diabate as like a guy who just exudes joy when he's on the court. Every time he blocks a shot, he holds his arm straight up in the air and he looks like the Rocky statue. And it's just like so fun. And then like I finished writing that blurb like 2 days ago, and he immediately got announced that he had an ankle injury and was going to miss, most of the rest of the year. And there is just so little reason for hope in Sacramento. Yeah. Almost all of it is self-inflicted. The team has mismanaged itself into oblivion, but like they have such good fans. I know some Sacramento Kings fans, they are so sad all the time. Their lives are demonstrably worse because of the team they have. And I just want them to have like a little bit of happiness. So even though I am sending Darren Peterson to hell, and it has nothing to do with because they're ethically tanking or whatever you want to say, like just for the fans' sakes, I hope the Kings get a cool lottery pick.
Just the most desperate situation in the league. Fair enough. And that would speak to the idea that we need to probably give increased odds for those teams that finish right at the bottom of getting one of those franchise changing talents. I'll come in and I will say selfishly, complete anti-ethical tank. I would love to see Utah get a top 3 pick because they've been in the tank for a few years now, and they were sort of ethically tanking to start their rebuild where, they had the Mike Conley year where they were too good to really get into the Wemby race. And they've essentially been too good owing to Will Hardy, owing to Lauri Markkanen and sort of ensemble of role players that they've had there over the years. Colin Sexton, John Collins playing the best basketball of their career over in Utah. I would like to reward the long-term tank, and I would also like to set Utah up to rocket up the standings next year with the acquisition of Jaren, with Walker Kessler hopefully coming back healthy, Keontae George having made a massive step this year. Lauri Markkanen doesn't have to pretend to be ill every other week. Let's send another team right to the top of the West. They're probably my main team that I'd like to see have some lottery luck. Is there anyone else, Mike, just to close out the pod?
Yeah, I think the next thing I'd like to see you do is the Pacers. And I think, maybe that's not popular because the Pacers are already set to be pretty good. But I just think back to like some of my happiest basketball memories in the last few years have been watching Pacers games. They played so differently than everyone else. They played with so much delight, so much glee in the game. And last year's playoffs were so good all up and down the board, right? Like so many classics all over the place. But the Pacers were single-handedly responsible for so many of them. Tyrese Halliburton having a hand in a game winner every single round, right? Like the strongest. Like I think I remember looking this up. He had like the second or the first best clutch shooting playoff history of all time. Like if you look at a player's career, he had more buzzer beaters than every other player ever in the history of their career, just in last playoff run. Yeah. And I think that like I'm worried that they're going to come back not nearly as strong. Zubac is a better center than Miles Turner. Mm-hmm. It's arguable whether Turner wasn't more important for the way that they played basketball. Like, I don't know if he wouldn't, like if Zubac is going to be the perfect fit or not. He might be. It'll be different. I just don't know. I'm really worried about Halliburton. People forget how rickety he looked to start last season. He's had 2 years in a row where he's just looked really bad for the first like 2 months of the season, and it takes him a while to get going. And like Achilles are scary, man. We talked about it with Tatum. If Halliburton isn't 100%, that team's gonna be nowhere near as good. But if they get a top 3 pick in this year's draft and they're able to get a Cam Boozer or a Darren Peterson or a Diabanza or whoever it is, like I feel pretty excited that team would be able to recapture some of the magic from the last couple of years. And I've loved watching the Pacers play so much, and I want to keep watching them play at a high level forever.
Nice. That's a lovely pick. Selfishly, I'll go one more. And again, the basketball gods would truly have like closed their doors to the rest of the NBA if the Dallas Mavericks managed to jump up into the top 3 again. But for Cooper Flagg's sake,
Oh, wow.
I'd like to see him get a proper running mate. He's not going to have a chance to in the next few years. There's not going to have much draft luck.
You're not feeling good about Kyrie Irving coming back at a high level? That's what I'm hearing.
Well, just more. I don't know if he's going to be there, right? We'll see. We'll see. Yeah, I want to see him get a running mate. I want to set Dallas up, and those poor fans that have had to endure, I suppose, what is it, 18 months or a year, just over a year now of inner turmoil. Set them up with a really lovely future. Set Cooper up to succeed and not be bashed as this like, oh, he was meant to be generational. Why are Dallas only 8th in the Western Conference? It's because it's the Western Conference, and it's just him, for the next couple of years. So set them up to be really interesting. And I always like when you have to watch sort of stars mesh. That's one of our chances to watch these stars mesh. And I think that particularly if it was the back-to-back Duke picks, if it were Boozer and Flag, that would be a hell of a lot of IQ on the court, a lot of passing, a lot of feel, and 2 very, very good basketball players. So that would be my final pick. Mike, unless you've got one more, we will get out of here, buddy.
Well, I have 2 minutes left, so I did have one more, which was the Wizards, just because I think they've got so many fun supporting pieces. I think Alex Sarr is quietly turning into a Jaren Jackson Jr.-esque monster. I think George is probably the most underrated role player in the game, and he's been a little bit down recently, but I think he'd bounce back if he was further down in the pecking order. You got Trey Johnson as the sharpshooter. You have just like a very good supporting cast ready to go. And like I know they have Trae Young and they have Anthony Davis now, which is fine. Like those guys are going to be bridge players to get them up out of the muck, because at some point, if you're bad for too long, like your first crop of fruit starts to spoil, right? And you don't want them to go away. You want them to turn into wine. So like you have to have some winning. So I'm fine for Trae Young and Anthony Davis there to like help people develop in the roles they're going to eventually play. But if they're going to need a long-term guy, and I kind of think it'd be fun to see the Wizards get just like a top 3 pick, top 4 pick, bring them in and like, let's go. Let's see what all these young guys can, like so many interesting young guys that fit together on paper so well is rare to see. And they just haven't had a chance to shine, and I'm hoping they will.
Yeah, it feels to me like assembling the rest of the American football team before you get the quarterback in, or like while your quarterback is on his rookie scale, sort of Philadelphia Eagles, Jalen Hurts style. And it's a way that I've suggested in the past. This is the way that teams should tank unless they are really, really confident in a number 1 option. Go out there and try and get your 2s. Try and get your OG Ananobis, your Trey Murphys, or in this case, your Alex Sarr, Bilal Coulibaly, Trey Johnson. These guys that can slot in and be really, really strong sort of supporting players, in the hopes that you then get a 1 or you trade for a 1 and your build can sort of skyrocket from there, because you get those guys under press contracts as well. What a way to end a podcast, Mike. We've got our teams that we'd like to see have lottery luck. We have dissected the Charlotte Hornets. We have had our say on the Rookie of the Year and the MVP race, and we've gone in depth on the Spurs and the Pistons in the top of the Eastern Conference. Hopefully, let's re-record this bit later. Hopefully you have really enjoyed this episode. I've been wanting to get Mike on for a long time. I finally remembered to message him about a week ago. He's been incredibly accommodating in coming on and putting up with some of my internet struggles. And I can only reward his efforts by advocating, please go and read Basketball Poetry. It is really fun, really unique writing. You just get the love of the game from Mike more than anything else. So make sure to go and check out all the reasons why you should be watching some of the tanking teams and more from the Basketball Poetry Substack. Mike, have you got anything to say before we get out of here?
Not all. It's been a pleasure. Always love chopping it up. Sorry I kept you for so long, but you got me going on some of these teams. And, I'm like a downhill ball. Like I just can't stop sometimes. So thank you for having me.
It's the sign of any good podcast. Mike, thank you so much, guys. Hope you enjoyed listening to that episode of The Drop Step. I will see you next time.